A man walks into a diner and sees his future. Not a fortune teller, not a sign from above, just a tired waitress who doesn't smile at him. And because she doesn't smile, he decides he has to have her. That decision will cost him his career, his marriage, his freedom, and 18 months in a state penitentiary. But here's the part that keeps me coming back to this story. He built every piece of the trap himself, laid each brick with his own hands, and when it finally closed around him, he had the audacity to act surprised. I am the Karmic debt collector, and tonight I'm going to tell you about Howard Calloway, a man who spent 18 years calculating what the world owed him and never once stopped to consider what he owed everyone else. We begin our story in Ridgewood, Ohio, 1962. A small town where everybody knows everybody, where a man's reputation is built on Sunday church attendance and a firm handshake, and where the same families have been running the same businesses since before the war. Howard Calloway fit right in. Assistant branch manager at First Federal Savings and Loan, Rotary Club member, church deacon, coached Little League on Saturday mornings. The kind of man other men nodded to on the street, the kind of man women described as a good provider. His wife Martha made the best potato salad at every church picnic. They'd been married 18 years, owned a nice ranch house on Elm Street. From the outside, the Calloways were the definition of the American dream, 1962 edition. But I've learned something in my line of work. The families that look perfect from the sidewalk are usually rotting from the inside. And Howard Calloway had been rotting for a long, long time. See, Howard married Martha when she was 22 and had just inherited $8,000 from her grandmother. That was real money back then, enough for a down payment on a house, enough to start a life. Howard saw that money the way a fox sees an unguarded henhouse. He figured Martha was his springboard, a launching pad to bigger things. But somewhere along the way, the launching never happened. The $8,000 got them that house on Elm Street, and there they stayed, year after year. The same town, the same job, the same faces every Sunday. And Howard? Howard started keeping a ledger in his head. Every dinner he sat through with Martha's boring friends, that went in the ledger. Every promotion he didn't get, ledger. Every time someone mentioned how lucky he was to have Martha, how she was the good one in the marriage, straight into the ledger. By 1962, Howard Calloway believed the world owed him a debt so large he was entitled to collect it any way he saw fit. That's when he found the Cloverleaf Diner. The Cloverleaf sat on Route 9, just far enough outside town to feel like an escape. Chrome and vinyl, coffee that had been on the burner too long, and a jukebox that only worked if you hit it just right. Howard started stopping there after work, told Martha he was working late. The lie came easy. They always do at first. The waitress behind the counter was named Diane Marsh, 28 years old, divorced, raising a 6-year-old son on tips and stubbornness. She'd come to Ridgewood from Toledo 3 years earlier, running from a bad marriage and worse memories. Diane didn't flirt with customers, didn't smile on command. She'd learned a long time ago that smiling at the wrong man was an invitation to trouble. Howard watched her move behind that counter, efficient, guarded, keeping everyone at arm's length. And he decided that distance was a challenge, that her exhaustion was sophistication, that her disinterest meant she just hadn't met the right man yet. He was wrong about all of it. But Howard Calloway had never let being wrong stop him before. He courted her like a campaign. Same stool every visit, generous tips. Questions about her son, little details he'd remember and mention the next time. A scarf for Christmas, nothing too expensive, just thoughtful enough to matter. And Diane? Diane was tired. Tired of double shifts and month-end scrambles and her son asking why they couldn't afford a television like the other kids. Howard wasn't handsome, wasn't exciting, but he had a good job. He handled money. He seemed stable. When he asked her to meet him for coffee on her day off, she said yes. Not because of romance, but because stability looked a lot like salvation when you were standing in her shoes. The affair started that spring. Howard rented a room at a motor court 30 miles away, told Martha he'd joined a regional banking association club. Martha nodded and didn't ask questions. She'd stopped asking questions years ago. But here's where Howard made his first real mistake. He started making promises. I'm going to leave her, Diane, soon. And the big one, you know Earl Krantz is looking to sell the Cloverleaf? What if I bought it, put it in your name? You'd never have to worry about money again. Diane had heard promises before, from her ex-husband, from her own father. But Howard worked at a bank. He handled money for a living. Maybe this time was different. She asked him carefully, "How would you pay for something like that?" Howard waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. "I've got savings Martha doesn't know about. You let me worry about the details." That was the first lie he told about money he didn't have. And once a man starts lying about money he doesn't have, he rarely finds a place to stop. The savings Howard promised didn't exist. But he worked at a bank. He handled accounts. He processed loans. And there are always ways if a man is willing to take them. He started small. The emergency fund he and Martha kept, she never checked it, that was his department. He withdrew $500, told himself he'd pay it back. Then he got creative. As assistant branch manager, he processed loan applications. He started padding fees, skimming small amounts from processing charges. $50 here, $75 there. Nothing that would trigger an audit. He opened an account at a bank in the next county under a slight variation of his name. H. Edward Calloway instead of Howard E. Calloway. He thought that was clever. It wasn't clever. He was just surrounded by people who trusted him. For now. Meanwhile, Martha noticed things. A $50 discrepancy in the household checkbook. Small enough to be a mistake, but Martha didn't make mistakes with numbers. A matchbook from some diner she'd never heard of, found in Howard's coat pocket. And Howard himself, whistling in the mornings, patient with small annoyances, cheerful in a way he hadn't been since they were courting. Martha recognized that mood. She'd seen it 20 years ago, when Howard still thought she was his ticket to something better. She filed these observations away, didn't confront him, didn't ask questions. Women in 1963 had limited options. Divorce meant social ruin. Suddenly, every whisper she pretended over the years not to hear came rushing back to her. So Martha watched, and Martha waited, and Martha kept her own ledger. The summer of 1963 changed everything. Earl Krantz, the diner's owner, announced he was selling the Cloverleaf to retire in Florida. Asking price, $12,000. Diane mentioned this to Howard with careful casualness. Howard, trapped by his own promises, didn't hesitate. "I'll make it happen." The problem: Howard had embezzled roughly $1,400 to that point. He needed almost 10 times that amount. So he got reckless. He processed a small business loan for a company that didn't exist, funneled $3,000 to his out-of-county account. He drained the emergency fund completely, another $2,000. He took out a personal loan using the house as collateral, forging Martha's signature on the application. To prove to Diane he was serious, he made a formal offer on the diner. $2,000 down, with a promissory note for the rest. He put the earnest money paperwork in Diane's name. Howard Calloway had just created a paper trail a child could follow. But he wasn't thinking about trails. He was thinking about Diane's face when he handed her the keys to her own restaurant. He never got to see that face. The bank's quarterly audit got moved up by 2 weeks. New regional management wanted to make their mark. Howard scrambled. The fraudulent loan was going to surface. He managed to delay the paperwork, blamed a basement flood for missing files. But it was a temporary fix at best. And Diane was asking questions. When would the sale close? When was he leaving Martha? Her sister in Cleveland had offered her a place to stay, so she couldn't wait forever. Howard promised October, said everything would be settled by then. October came and went. Howard made excuses. The audit, complications with the sale. Martha was suspicious, he needed to be careful. Diane had heard these excuses before. Different man, same song. She visited her sister in Cleveland that November. Her brother-in-law worked in insurance. Practical man, good with numbers. He asked about this fellow Diane had been seeing. She mentioned Howard was buying her a diner, that he was leaving his wife. Her brother-in-law raised an eyebrow. And the diner, whose name is on the paperwork? His or yours? Diane realized she didn't actually know where Howard's money was coming from. She'd seen paperwork with her name on it, sure, but she'd never seen a bank statement, never seen proof of funds. Her brother-in-law gave her a piece of advice she never forgot. If a man is willing to steal from his wife, he's willing to steal from you. Get something in writing, something that protects you. Diane went back to Ridgewood with new eyes. She didn't confront Howard. Confrontation was for people who had power. Diane had learned long ago to work with what she had. She started keeping records. Every gift he'd given her, documented. Every check he'd written for expenses, photocopied at the library. The earnest money paperwork, she made a duplicate and stored it at her sister's house. She asked Howard casually to put something in writing. For the lawyers, when the sale closes, they'll want to see where the money came from. Howard, pleased that she was taking their future seriously, wrote her a letter, mentioned his nest egg, hinted at creative financing, signed his full name. He handed her the rope. She just held on to it. December 1963. Martha found the letter from the county bank. A late notice on a loan she'd never applied for, secured against a house she owned half of, with a signature she'd never signed. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She went to the bank, asked to see the original documents, and a clerk who'd known her from church for 15 years showed her everything. The forgery was obvious. Howard had always been lazy about details. Martha took copies of everything, found a lawyer in the next town, a woman, one of the few practicing in that part of Ohio, asked what her options were. Then she waited for the right moment. It came 2 weeks before Christmas. Martha asked Howard to come home from work early, something important to discuss. He arrived irritated, unsuspecting, found Martha at the kitchen table with a folder of documents and a stillness he'd never seen before. She slid the papers across the table, the forged loan, the bank statements, the timeline of withdrawals. "I know about Diane," she said. "I know about the money, and I know about the diner you promised her." Howard went through every stage: denial, anger, bargaining, threats. Martha sat through all of it like she was watching the weather pass. When he finally said, "No one will believe you over me," she slid one last document across the table. Diane's letter, the one where Howard detailed his creative financing, in his own handwriting with his own signature. "She gave this to me herself," Martha said. "Yesterday." Howard drove straight to the Cloverleaf to confront Diane. Stormed through the door during the lunch rush, shouting accusations in front of a dozen witnesses, including the county prosecutor's secretary and 2 members of his own church. He called Diane a thief, said she'd stolen from him, threatened her in a room full of people who would remember every word. Diane stayed behind the counter, calm as glass. "I didn't take anything that wasn't offered," she said, "and I have the paperwork to prove it." By the time Howard realized what he'd done, confirmed a connection he could have denied, created witnesses he couldn't silence, it was already over. He just didn't know it yet. January 1964. The full accounting came due. First Federal fired Howard pending a criminal investigation. The fraudulent loans surfaced. The embezzlement unraveled like a cheap sweater. The county prosecutor charged him with bank fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Between Martha's evidence and Diane's documentation, the case was airtight. The divorce finalized in record time. Martha kept the house. Howard signed it over to avoid additional charges. The judge, who knew Martha from church, approved without hesitation. Howard Calloway served 18 months in state prison. When he got out, no bank in Ohio would hire him. His former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The Cloverleaf Diner, still operating, new owners from Columbus, had a policy of refusing him service. Last anyone heard, he was working as a night clerk at a motor court outside Cincinnati. Same chain where he used to rent rooms for his affair. He tells anyone who'll listen that he was framed by 2 jealous women. Nobody believes him. Martha sold the house in 1966, moved to a smaller place closer to town. She volunteers at the library 3 days a week and still makes the best potato salad at church functions. When people ask why she never remarried, she tells them she wasted enough years on one man's ego. Diane moved to Cleveland to be near her sister, got a job as a bookkeeper. Her attention to documentation impressed Martha's lawyer enough to provide a reference. Her son grew up to become a CPA. When people ask her about Ridgewood, she just shrugs and says, "I learned that a paper trail goes both ways. Some debts are paid in dollars, some are paid in years, but every ledger balances eventually." Howard Calloway spent 18 years calculating what the world owed him. He never once stopped to calculate what he owed everyone else. The interest, as always, was more than he could afford. Another satisfying entry in the Karmic ledger. If you enjoyed watching Karma settle its accounts, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next time a debt comes due. Drop a comment below. Have you ever watched someone build their own trap and walk right into it? And if you haven't already, check out my other stories. The Karmic ledger is full of people who thought they could outrun what they owed. Until next time, mind your debts.